I'm Jerry Gordon, the senior editor at the New English Review, and with me is my friend, comrade in arms and in thoughts, former U.S. Army Brigadier General, John Adams. And John, before we get into the discussion, would you kindly offer a blessing for both Israel and the IDF?
Thank you. It's a privilege to join you, Jerry. And it is my great pleasure to ask Hashem's blessing on the people of Israel and the Jewish community worldwide in this time of great strife and stress as we and the IDF literally fight for the survival of Israel. The people of Israel and the Jewish community worldwide are grateful for the sacrifices of the IDF, and we ask Hashem's blessing on them as they continue this fight.
Things have taken a turn in the war between Israel and its enemies, whether they're immediately Hamas in Gaza, the Houthi, essentially, who seem to be the pirates of the Red Sea, the Iranians, who basically are trying to ship all of their foreign legion of proxies to Hezbollah in Lebanon. And we could go on and on in that regard. But the flashpoint appears to be what is developing on the northern border. Essentially, somebody made a wise remark not too many weeks ago that one of the results of October 7th was essentially the evacuation of, yes, the southern Israel border with Gaza, but more especially the northern border, because almost immediately on the heels of the attack, Hezbollah started opening up what I call the drone and rocket wars. The flashpoint appears to be what Hezbollah did this past week. It sent a drone down to central Israel that took pictures of facilities at the port of Haifa. And that seems to have become a trigger point for the Netanyahu government and the IDF commanders to prepare for a possible ground and air war, and I might say combined arms, given the experience of what happened during the so-called Second Lebanese War in 2006. So the question here is, does Israel have the capability to conduct what is essentially a multi-front war at this point, particularly one that's going to be more conventional on the northern frontier than what is going on currently with operations in Gaza?
And the answer to that question is, let's filter the alleged drone video through reality. The IDF and the Israel Air Force have the ability to shoot drones down. And if indeed this is accurately portrayed, at least in the press, that they're taking aerial video of Haifa, I have a question about that, because it takes to do an aerial drone reconnaissance of any place. The drone has to be in stable flight, has to be able to focus, and there's no sense that the IAF would let that happen without trying to interfere with it, if nothing else, and shoot it down if possible. So where else can you get aerial photography of any place, almost any place in the world? On Google. You can just download it. There's so many commercial sites that you can get aerial photographs of almost any place. You can't get them of Dimona, okay? Try to take an aerial photography of Dimona, the Israeli nuclear research site. You're not going to get that because they've successfully scrambled and blocked that feed. But Haifa, it's a port. And if you want to take a photo of, I can download photos of Haifa if I want. No problem. I have actually, because I wanted to see where my friends in Haifa live, and I can see it online. But so I don't know if it was commercial video, but it likely is. But let's assume that it was not commercial video and they got videos. I think that probably would, even if it was not really drone video, I think it would certainly put the issue of why is this happening in front of the Israeli public, and they want a resolution of the northern problem. The northern problem being writ large is 80 to 90,000 people evacuated. There's a lot of farms up there. They're not being farmed. There's a lot of businesses up there. They're not being businessed. And so this has an effect on the Israeli economy, on the Israeli demographic. And oh, by the way, a lot of the folks who live along the northern border between Israel and Lebanon are there. There's a demographic difference between that population and the population that's along the border with Gaza. A lot of the population on the border with Gaza are kibbutzniks. A lot of them are with the peace movement, because that's where they wanted to be, to try to symbolize we can actually have a relationship with the Palestinians. The people on the northern border with Israel, they're not peaceniks. They're hard people. I know some of them. And a lot of them don't leave because they want to fight it out. But a lot of them are just, they're hard scrabble farmers and businessmen who want to live up there. They don't want to be, they want to go back home. Their families are from there. They want the schools to open. So there's a real strong feeling among the population that has evacuated the north. Let's go back home. Why are we having to wait for this? The uncomplicated but important answer to that you hinted at is because the IDF has its hands full in Gaza. And for the last 9 months, they've had their hands full in Gaza. There's fighting continuing. If they have to go full bore into Lebanon, it's going to be a real distraction, not only for the ongoing efforts in Gaza, but for the entire defense establishment. So they're trying to stave it off as long as they can. I think they will not be able to stave it off much longer. Israelis who live in the north are demanding that there be a resolution to this, and they won't be able to. They're going to have to come up with a resolution pretty soon. The last question: can they do the combined arms operation? My thought is that they can. They've known they've been preparing for this for months. They have effective combined arms operation, which would be very different from the operations in Gaza. But they have all the maneuver equipment. They have all the air support they need. The IAF is specialized in aerial air-to-ground support. It's interesting to bring up the fact that we, the United States, have restricted the supply of 2,000-pound bombs. Mm-hmm. They're more important for the combat in Lebanon than they are in Gaza. They're important to get rid of the Hezbollah installations in southern Lebanon. So why we would do that, there's a lot of questions I can't answer, that the administration is doing things that are inexplicable to me, but that's one of them. And it's sort of a lie. And they say, oh, we're going to keep them from operating in Gaza by cutting off 2,000-pound bombs. That's not why they're doing it. And we see that from Amos Hochstein's, the special representative to try to solve the Israel-Lebanon problem. He's not trying to solve the problem. He's trying to prevent an expansion of the problem, to let it be exacerbated by conflict, more likely to conflict directly with Iran. And it's having a great effect of keeping Israel from continuing to operate.
Well,
answers the question.
Hochstein announced, I think it was yesterday, that basically he considered his discussions in Beirut a failure.
I would agree.
And I think it's among the other failures, quite frankly, of the Biden administration, both in terms of military support for Israel, but also obsessed about the necessity of ameliorating or or preventing a lurch towards an escalation in the war. Now, having said that, let's ask a question. At this virtually at the time of October 7 or following it, there was a U.S. carrier task force positioned off of the Mediterranean. Where's that now? Is that withdrawn and contending with the Houthi in the Red Sea, or have they piecemealed that out and send some of that back to the States for replenishment? I have no idea. But the problem is the following. Nasrallah just yesterday announced that basically if Israel did something of the type that some people are contemplating, that he would do something else. He'd attack Cyprus with his missiles. Is that an escalation of the conflict? You bet yourself it is in this regard. As is the ability of Iran to gather up its Shia proxies, particularly those in Iraq and some in Syria, to essentially march overland into Lebanon. Syria has done that before.
Yeah.
So it's really a very messy predicament. The other issue is the US's clamor for the so-called humanitarian pause for delivery of, quote, massive amounts of food, the failure of the UN food program to do anything there. And by the way, they have a more dramatic program in Sudan at this point in time. They can't do anything, apparently, about delivering food even to the UN High Commission refugee camps and all of the 6 surrounding countries to which 10 million Sudanese have fled because of the divisive conflict there. And then the U.S. investing the sum of whatever it was, $320 million to build this offshore pier that appears to be foundering in heavy seas in the Mediterranean. And then pounding on Israel in the context of opening up the crossings to bring stuff in, only to have them blocked and essentially raided in Gaza. But on top of that, the U.S. is in a funny predicament. Of all things, the UN did a study of whether or not there were indications of famine in Gaza. Guess what? There are none. There are none. So it was a Japanese word I learned when I was doing work in Hawaii. This is a shabai. This is a fraud, a major fraud on its face.
Should we be surprised? I mean,
No.
We already accept Hamas's own casualty figures. We just accept it, even though they're undercut subsequently by the UN that says, oh no, those are double what they should be. But the notion of accepting the casualty figures of Hamas in the first place is ridiculous. But we do. We, the United States, accepts it. There's so many things that have happened that are bending reality that it's almost worth saying anything the administration claims is suspect, because it's not based on any independent verification at all. But let's use the way that you mentioned the humanitarian assistance by the pier, the logistics over the shore pier. That's a proven technology. That's not a problem, but it's not a proven technology for that region and that particular use. I don't know who put it in Joe Biden's mouth and on his script that he was going to announce this, but whoever didn't think it through and probably didn't talk to the Army and the Navy whose responsibility it is to execute it. It has been an abject failure, not only because of the weather problem, but also because they didn't think through how they would distribute it after it gets on the shore. And it's, the U.S. is spending all its time putting sanctions on Saab 9, which is the Israeli group which is trying to prevent the flow of supplies to Gaza. Admittedly, they're doing that, but they're having a very small proportional effect. The real problem in Gaza is once the supplies get off the pier, the Gazans themselves raid it, loot it, and Hamas uses it to get its own supplies. So where do the supplies go? They go to Hamas, and I'm sure they go to people that need it, but the whole distribution plan is whack. It doesn't make sense. So until you sort that out, they're not going to get supplies to people that need them in Gaza. Yeah, it's a public relations disaster because it's so obvious that the efforts themselves are resulting in bupkis. There's no outcome worth talking about. The same thing's true with this latest back and forth so-called Israeli proposal for a ceasefire, which immediately was denounced by the head of the Israeli government. We're not going to do something that doesn't let us fulfill our obligation to get the hostages out and destroy Hamas. And this agreement, this so-called Israeli agreement that President Biden announced almost, completely unexpected at a press conference related to another issue. Again, it's hard to know where things come into his mind and how they come into his mind. And of course, once he says it, the administration has to defend it. And you get, wise people like Karine Jean-Pierre saying, oh, it's the president's policy, well thought through. No, it's not. It wasn't thought through at all. And now they're trying to, and for almost a month now, been trying to find out where that came from, who it came from. I suspect it came from probably one of the visits of Benny Gantz or maybe Yair Lapid to Washington, which makes it technically an Israeli proposal, but it didn't come from Netanyahu. And I think that's a joke.
That episode was clearly an indication that Gantz was the cat's paw for the Biden administration.
Yes.
And you saw that in the wake of 2 weekends ago with the rescue of the 4 hostages by the IDF in what basically was a classic operation of something called a Dudavan, as I would call it.
Yeah.
You actually had people masquerading as Gazans, essentially, obviously engaged in monitoring the conditions in this apartment complex, a cotton complex, which was occupied by some, quote, pretty wealthy Gazans. And then on top of that, I think, wasn't there an Al Jazeera journalist who was living there, who was during the daytime reporting and on nighttime essentially actively engaged in the work of Hamas?
Yeah. Well, yeah, it was a Fauda style operation. Anybody familiar with Fauda will recognize that.
Yes. Right.
But Fauda was created by Dudavan veterans, and those who are able to masquerade as Arabs well and spoke Arabic fluently conducted this really brilliant operation that, according to the Palestinians, to the Gazans, to the Hamas, killed 250. Well, I don't believe that. But okay, they're going to make whatever claim they can to undermine the success of the operation. But I think it was brilliant how they did it, and they got four back alive, which is hard. And there was a comment in the press that said, "Well, they should have warned everybody in the complex so that they knew there was going to be an operation." Yeah, that really makes a lot of sense. Think about that for 30 seconds. That would never, the operation would be shut down and the hostages would be dead. So it was a brilliant operation. You mentioned the pause for humanitarian operations, which happened, which is happening, but it's not. It was announced by the press. Who knows? And the press came up with this catchment of it. But though they're going to stop operations from I think 8 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon, they'll allow convoys to come in, and it'll shut down aerial reconnaissance over the period. And that's not true. It never was true. The only plan was to have a very narrow focus so that the humanitarian relief could go along these very specific narrow corridors,
Yep.
which is true and which it is. But it was announced in a very irresponsible way, and you saw the immediate response of the Israeli government to it, like why we're not going to do that. And it's also not the case. If they say that we're not going to conduct aerial reconnaissance over a corridor less than a kilometer wide, who cares? You can conduct aerial reconnaissance just outside the corridor and get every bit of information you would anyway. So it was really the press again completely messed that announcement up and caused disagreement, or apparent disagreement. I'm sure there wasn't real disagreement between the IDF and the government, but apparent disagreement between the IDF and the government. It's just an emphasis that the press like to create these faux controversies, and they were successful again to do that. We can't trust the press, honestly. If we depend on the press for all the information we get, we're going to be constantly questioning our own minds. I don't trust the press. I can figure it out. I think you and I both can figure this out as intelligence professionals, can figure this out from just the context, and from our personal connections. But to trust the press, even a outlet like the Jerusalem Post, you can't believe everything you read. This is not true. They report, they're like you and me, only they have even less insight.
Well, interestingly enough, the world has not reacted to the revelation in the what are called the Sinwar letters, which clearly indicates that this man is a psychopath who essentially would sacrifice relatives or his own people to use it as a propaganda tool to get the world's sympathy, to disable or disarm his enemy, meaning the IDF in that regard. And the world media has globally sucked this up in this regard, totally sucked this up. And in fact, it's reflected in the ongoing problems we have in the US with violence perpetrated by pro-Palestinian groups, whether it's on campuses or in New York or in Illinois or in California, as it turns out these days. But the question is, why are people so deluded to believe that Hamas is anything less than ISIS was, or it still is? And basically, why should we even negotiate with them?
I agree. Well, I think the one thing we should take is Sinwar at his word. We know exactly what he wants to do. He wants to kill Jews. He wants to destroy Israel. He'll do anything to get that, to accomplish that. Anything. Lie, cheat, whatever. It doesn't matter. It's all about his definition of victory, which is the destruction of Israel and the elimination of Jews. That's what he wants. And I think we should believe it. Hamas, you said it exactly right. Hamas is just they're unredeemed evil. And everything they do is something we cannot trust. In fact, not only not trust, we should distrust them. We should act as they are the enemy, they are the evil. And I can't imagine why anybody with any, I know why our administration is trying to get through this. They want to get the reelection, and they want the Democrats reelected, and they think if there's more conflict, then there'll be less chance of them getting reelected because they screwed it up, which is all true, but they want to try to hide and obscure that. So that's why they're doing. That's why Hochstein goes and says, "Yeah, I failed in my mission to reduce the tensions in the Israel-Lebanon border." No kidding.
There was a horrible event this past week. It was a strange event in Rafah in which an Israeli Namir APC was blown up, killing 8 grunts in that instance, who were all combat engineers. And this is a system that also has the capability of deterring RPGs. So, and then there's a real question of whether or not the tactics of going in and keeping explosives on that vehicle is a wise thing to do at this point. And it raised questions about whether or not the Israeli tactics are working in the context of destroying the threat there and simultaneously protecting the lives of the young soldiers in the IDF who are in those units going into combat. And that was one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, which you and I have talked about previously, but has been leaked recently, was the announcement by the former Gaza division commander of his resignation, followed by media reports about the information that was available several weeks prior to the October's report. And I also understand there was a report that was as far back as 2 years ago that was developed by Unit 8200 observers, several of whom were women who were captured during the initial penetration by Hamas. God knows whether they've survived after this horrendous activity. And it is not unlike what happened after the Yom Kippur War. We are not yet, or Israel has not yet said anything more, that the matter is being investigated. But clearly, the reports by Israel Radio about the matter has refocused on the question of command quality transmission of intelligence information, subject that you and I know pretty intimately in this regard. So what are your thoughts?
Well, I think that what the resignation of the Gaza division commander, I'm sure he had good reason to feel responsible and to act upon it. He's been in command for 2.5 years, and under a lot of stress. He probably needs to turn it over to somebody else, no matter what. But his responsibility is not. He knows better than anybody else how responsible he is. As we remember, that was reported very closely after October 7th. The head of the Israeli military intelligence has also offered his resignation.
Correct.
And I'm sure he knows his responsibility. We do too. We know that there was a problem with dissemination of intelligence. We know that some of it was blocked. He's talked about that. His wife is a leftist activist herself. So I think part of the problem, and I don't know how much, I'm sure as the investigations proceed, the Israeli leadership on the left that also has senior military in it will be found to be part of this. They were not interested in having a fight with Hamas. They wanted to, they want, the Israeli left wants peace and negotiation. I think there's a difference between the Israeli left and Israeli right on the whole issue of Gaza and the whole issue of the Palestinian state. So to the extent that the head of Israeli military intelligence had any, his wife's membership in these Israeli leftist organizations had any influence on him, we don't know. Does there need to be an investigation? Yes. Is this the time to release the results to the public? I would argue no. I would argue let's get to the other side of first Gaza, and then look at the other side of the Hezbollah war. There's time for sorting this out. This is not the time to stack arms and let's do an investigation and try to figure out what happened. As we're fighting the war for survival, I think that's where the focus ought to be. That's my thought.
The Biden administration has been caught in a trap of its own lies about supply of critical weapons. You mentioned the withdrawal of 2,000-pound bombs, which, by the way, you're going to require to go after those lagers, as I call them, where the precision missiles, for example, in the Bekaa Valley, are stored. And if you can't do that, you can't win. And there, you've got that. Then it's the Defense Department is pushing back on Israel's request for the F-15s, the new F-15s. Why is that? Doesn't take a rocket scientist. You need them essentially if you're going to replicate what Israel has done not once but twice to take out nuclear facilities way back in 1981 in the case of Saddam Hussein's reactors in Baghdad, and then in 2007 for the North Korean designed plutonium factory in Syria. So, you know, who's fooling who in this regard? Israel's going to need those kinds of weapon systems to defend itself.
They do. And you mentioned it earlier, Jerry. When you make perhaps I'm not using the correct terminology. When you make a threat against somebody, that itself that prevents them from doing things. There's at least a deterrence effect. Deterrence. We're undermining Israel's deterrence. If the enemy, whether it be Iran or Hezbollah or Hamas or the Houthis, don't have any belief that you will do actions that would hurt them, they're going to do whatever they want. So let's talk about deterrence in this case. In May, there was a massive attack of missiles and rockets by directly from Iran against Israel. And was there an international effort led by Israel, but the U.S. was part of it too? We like to claim a bigger role than we were, but Israel was the major. They lifted the major weight. They did the major combat. But there hasn't been any retaliation against Iran for that. We didn't really call them out. Where does that leave deterrence? We let them get away with doing it. Were they successful? No, but it wasn't for lack of trying. When it comes to the Houthis, look at what they've done for the last several months, I think since December. Traffic in the area, Red Sea area, is down by 90%. Shipping companies are sending things around the Cape of Good Hope at a tremendous expense, which has a global effect on trade. Have the Houthis succeeded in what they were trying to do, which is to deter trade? And they haven't sunk an aircraft carrier yet, but they would love to do that, and they have the capability to do that with just a couple of hits from their rockets and missiles, and would do that. But have we stopped their depredations with what we've done? No, we have not deterred them from continuing to attack both international shipping and international naval vessels, including ours. We have not deterred them. We're failing at deterrence. We The United States is failing with deterrence, and because we don't have Israel's back and don't do what we need to do to cover them, they failed at deterrence. Deterrence is the issue here. We've got to deter Iran, Hezbollah, and Hamas, and right now we're doing a very poor job of it.
Yes, and we note the sinking of another commercial vessel in the Red Sea approaches this past week. And it does raise the issue of a couple of things. You may recall, I think it was back in 2015, that the Houthi, together with the Iranians, attacked the Saudi oil facilities in Riyadh, and they caused significant damage to the oil storage facilities there in that case. And it has essentially had a chilling effect on Saudi Arabia's question about whether or not it supports the, quote, international alliance to go after Iran in there. Well, nobody on the international alliance side has talked about doing something that we did in 1988 under somebody by the name of Mr. Reagan, as I recall, called the Tanker War, which took out the Iranian platforms. It's actually seized them with Navy SEALs and others. It speaks of diffidence about trying to bribe an enemy not to kill you. That's how I view the situation. It was behind the whole JCOP episode fostered by President Obama and his team at that point in time. And it's still redolent today in this regard. Now, speaking about that, we've had stunning reports that the IAEA actually seconded people to work with the Russians that may have accelerated the nature of Iran's ability to create nuclear devices. That's all I will say in that regard. And at some point in time, the international alliance, for all it's worth, has got to stop doing a couple things. It's reflected by what's happening in Ukraine now. They're micromanaging the use of Western technology in attacking the enemy. The enemy, as far as I'm concerned, in that fiasco is, of course, Mr. Putin, who seems to be anxious to create international relations of a sort with North Korea. Why? They're running out of ammo in Russia.
North Korea's got plenty of it.
Right. And the question is, what's the quid pro quo for North Korea in this regard? Is it getting certain technology out of Russia that may be used to finally produce miniaturized warheads, essentially, for those devices that it's been throwing up in the air for the past several years? I had the occasion back in 2016 to interview the outgoing NORAD commander. And I said, what do you think is going to happen by the early turn of the next decade? Meaning right now. And he said, I would expect that North Korea may have the capability to do that. That's the missing link in that regard. So here we have an administration that basically has adopted kind of a blind spot attitude about where the threats are coming from. And its only reaction to them is essentially to bribe them.
It won't work.
Never worked.
No. won't work. No, we're helping. Let's focus on North Korea for just a moment. We're helping North Korea get what they really want, which is regime survival. We help them. We, the United States, are helping by turning our blind eye to this development. Um, North Korea has no shortage of artillery ammunition, tank ammunition, ammunition of all kinds, because that's what they have focused on building and acquiring for since they've begun it. And a lot of the tank and artillery ammunition is decades old. The technology, they're not doing anything unusual from their perspective. They're just given what they've got plenty of to get cash from Russia, which has plenty of cash. So they can share that with North Korea, and it's a great trade for each of them. But we're not doing anything to stop that. We're only encouraging Russia. Russia, go get this ammunition from North Korea. Or for Nexus, there's plenty of ammunition for Russia. North Korea, China, those are the main sources. Putin is in Vietnam right now. Will Vietnam sell him ammunition? Probably. Why not? What's the downside? Does he need it right now? Probably not. He's just got a wealth of ammunition from North Korea that'll last him for who knows how long. He doesn't need to publicize ties with Vietnam and China. Just bleed North Korea with the same ammunition and give them the cash that you've already got. Because the problem with the sanctions that we've imposed on Russia, the Russian economy is stronger than before. They are not suffering, neither from a commercial standpoint or from a military standpoint. They've got plenty. So what we're doing is feckless. It doesn't hurt them where they need to be hurt. Russia's stronger than it was before. I don't think we've thought this through. I really don't. We, the United States, need to think through what we're doing with Russia to hurt them where they need to be hurt the most. And we're not doing that. We're letting them get away with this.
I want to circle back to an issue of long standing in Israel. And it's the question of drafting Haredi young men, the extremist Orthodox kids. And they are going to be a significant growing demographic for Israel because of their fecundity, so to speak. And yet, the question was raised this week by somebody I know, Daniel Gordis, who said, do we really have a Zionist chief rabbi anymore? That's a stunning question to ask. By definition, Judaism is Zionism, if you want to take it in that direction. And yet, Gordis's question was a legitimate one, and it was answered in part by an Orthodox rabbi in Israel who said, yes, it is part and parcel of our responsibility as a faith to defend itself and its people. And yet the politics about it between members of the coalition, if you want to call it that, political coalition on the right, has really essentially forestalled that capability. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Yes, I mean, the obvious thought is that this is a hugely complicated issue rooted in time and has not been resolved since the beginning of the State of Israel. And as you know, the original agreement with the ultra-Orthodox community to allow yeshiva study for ultra-Orthodox young men, as opposed to being drafted, was an agreement between Ben-Gurion and the head of the ultra-Orthodox community in 1947, when UNSCOP, the UN Commission on Palestine, was coming to Israel to see what the prospects were for an Israeli state. And Ben-Gurion made an agreement with the head of the ultra-Orthodox community to tell UNSCOP that the ultra-Orthodox community indeed wanted the state of Israel. And if Ben Gurion had not made that deal with the head of the ultra-Orthodox community, they would have said no. But they said yes for a very practical reason, because the study of young Haredi ultra-Orthodox Jews in yeshivas is important for the faith. We get that. We don't want them not to study. I want to study Torah. I want to serve God. I want to do good things. In that sense, I'm no different from a yeshiva student. I may not be as devoted or spend as much time, but I'm very, very understanding of why they want to study Torah. That makes sense to me. What doesn't make sense, and the crux of the issue now is, as time has gone on, and that agreement made it difficult for Israel to form a constitution, because of the definition of equality is that every citizen shares the same burdens. And at the time, the ultra-Orthodox were not sharing the same burdens because they were exempt from military draft. For understandable reasons in the context of 1947, I don't know if those same reasons apply in 2024. And a lot of Israelis are asking themselves that question. I think some ask themselves that question from a practical standpoint, as you just suggested. The Haredi community is prolific. There's a lot of them, and they have kids. And so when you look at the number of Haredi young people, men, who would be the backbone of the Haredi contribution to the IDF, not to diminish the background of the Haredi young women to the IDF, because they're certainly important as well, but we're really talking about the young yeshiva students, the males. They're much more proportionally than they were in 1947. And are they needed for service? Yes, they're needed for service. So we talked a little bit before this conversation about Mr. Bakat, who is a Likud lawmaker. I think we just lost Zoom.
No, we didn't.
I'm sorry. If you want to go on, I'm happy to for a few minutes. I know that Zoom just cut out, but if you want to.
It is recording.
Oh, good. Well, I will wrap up quickly. With the change in proportion and demographic of Haredi versus non-Haredi in the Israeli population, it's more obvious that they're more proportionally now than there were in early Israel, and that it would make a difference on IDF numbers if Haredi were drafted. It's unfortunately complicated by leftist politics in Israel, where the Israeli left, mostly secular, not religious, who have less interest in the Torah than the religious population, for understandable reasons. See why? Let's have everybody serving the same cause. Let's everybody be equal. Let's have a constitution that enshrines equality of every citizen. And that was actually part of the problem with the protests against Netanyahu before October 7th. And because the left has basically, they're acting as if October 7th never happened. We still want to get rid of Netanyahu. Yeah, there's a war going on, but we still want to get rid of Netanyahu. We want to have a constitution. The left is the left. They're always going to do what they do. Yair Lapid, the leader of the opposition, and Shikma Bressler, more important, civilian activist, has been advocating for the end of Haredi exemption for a decade now. They're not going to stop fighting until they get what they want. It doesn't matter if it's according to democracy or not. It's their goal, and they're going to do that. So it's a very complicated issue, complicated by history, complicated by politics. I don't know where I come down on it. I guess if I were in Israel, I would personally think that there ought to be a compromise. I think this latest bill to come up with something that the Knesset can pass is a compromise of sorts. It doesn't go as far as even Bakat, the Likud minister, who wants it to go, and he may leave the government because of it. He's the minister of economy, I think. So there's a real ongoing conflict about Haredi exemption, and the Israelis are going to have to work it out. I hope that the U.S. can stay out of that. That it's not ours to decide. It's for the Israeli citizens themselves.
Our final issue concerns the disruptive activities prior to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech before another joint session of Congress on July 27th. It appears the Democratic Party is in complete disarray. The progressive wing essentially will do everything it can to sabotage the nature of his appearance there. And basically, the polls in the United States are trying to send a message to what passes for the Democratic congressional leadership. It's that we support Israel.
60% of Americans in the latest polling support the cause of Israel. Less than 20% support Hamas. Well, that just means that less than 20% of the United States is crazy, because supporting Hamas is crazy. Supporting Israel makes every bit of sense from the U.S. perspective, from the American national security perspective. And I think the Democratic Party is split. There's the crazy part, which is the same part that supports riots in the streets for all kinds of causes. And then there's the same part, which is genuinely supportive of American national security policy. I do believe that there are Democrats who support national security. I believe that. I know that. But I also think there are a lot of Democrats, and there's probably a fair number of Republicans who are crazy and they don't support U.S. national security. When Netanyahu comes to the United States, and may he come to the United States to address the joint session of Congress in late July, may he be welcomed by the American public. I believe he will be. If there's somebody who doesn't want him there, stay away. We don't need some of the crazy people, even in Congress, who can stay home that day. That's okay. But let's host this friend of the United States, and the United States people will support that, guaranteed. I think that's what a lot of the radical Democrats are afraid of. It will lay bare the notion that the American public does. It will show clearly the American public is behind the government of Israel. That's what we want to show.
On that note, I wanted to thank you for another stellar discussion on what is occurring in the Middle East and in regard to Israel and its conflict with essentially global jihadism. That is essentially what Israel and the world should recognize as the threat. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Jerry. May Hashem bless Israel, and especially bless those hostages who still must come home, and those IDF soldiers who are fighting for all of us.
Thank you.